Asbury Seminary Revival, or Asbury College Revival, right? What day? I don't even know. What day are we in now there? 11? Is that right? 11 days. How many are not familiar with what's happening there? Raise your hand. Okay, there is a college, I'm trying to remember, it's East Coast. What is the state, though? Help me. Is it Kentucky? Kentucky, not quite East Coast. So Kentucky, and this is not a new thing for them. Some of us are old enough to remember 1970 and a similar outpouring of God's Spirit. So just to kind of cut to the chase, they had a chapel service 11 days ago that is still going. And people are coming literally from around the world to join in that. And it's interesting. How many have at least viewed like some video on this from Facebook? Okay, quite a few. It's not hard to find. And if you Google, in fact, I showed this to our church board, I don't know how many years ago, 5, 6 years ago at least. There was a news report that came out about the 1971, and you can find that. Just Google Asbury, Asbury, Seminary Revival, and if you put in 1970, you'll get the information, kind of a documentary form from the first one. So in a general way, I want to say to you, these are our brothers and sisters. The school there has Wesleyan roots, and so it's connected to us in a lot of ways. And it was my privilege several years ago to hear Dennis Kinlaw, who was the president there at the earlier one in 1970, come and share. And he co-authored a book, I think it's called One Timeless Moment. And it's just a skinny book. You can pick that up. But what's interesting to me, a lot of things. We have, and part of what we're going to talk about today, it kind of has 2 points, but there's kind of a surprise that we experience. There's this surprise that here is this thing happening over there. God is moving over there, and people just keep coming, literally, like I said, from around the world. And sometimes I've read on it that it gets to be very few people, but it never has dwindled to where there's nobody there. It didn't come with some big boom, There was no parting of the campus grass or something to lead to the chapel. It just emanated from hungry people praying. And so, but what you see happen, I think, online is it moves kind of from a surprise, and people begin sharing, and then there is people who are trying to dictate whether or not it's a true revival because they have done analytics and they have things that are earmarks for revival. And I think the thing that I want to say is, He's God; He can do it however He wants. And to trust in that, and to hope in that, and even to expect in that. And the fact that it comes from a generation that is kind of maligned right now by us old fuddy-duddy folks. They don't know how to do it. They don't know how to do church. I'm not sure that they're with us. But it's a college age group. It's a vibe age group that is leading right now in an international focus on the power of God. And I want to kind of come back and say, we should not doubt. The truth is most, again, it was same institution in 1970, and there's things like that are happening. We need to remember that God's able to do through His Spirit whatever He wants to do. But it's interesting because for us today, and the things that we've been working through these last 4 weeks, and the what is the what, and I'm going to get to all that stuff in just a second, but God is ready to move. I said this before. as long as some people are hungering and thirsting. Matthew 5. Jesus saw the crowds. He went up on the mountainside. He saw the crowds. And then he sat down. And his disciples came to him. And he began to teach them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be" what? Filled or satisfied. So I want to talk today just kind of within that background, within that understanding of God is ready to move, and he does things sometimes in new and vibrant ways, and we talk about that, and we can find scriptural support for that. Behold, this fresh thing that I am doing, right? And then he does things sometimes that are old school. And again, us old fuddy-duddies go, "See, I told you." That's how it works. But it's a both and, it's not an either or. So this being the very last one on the what is the what, if you're here for the first time, what I've done in the last 3 weeks is giving you kind of 3 components to be reflective of where I feel like as a church and a church body, we kind of want to firmly plant our feet, I should say, and put our hands to work in. The first one was talking about growing the kingdom, and we spent some time discussing evangelism. And that we don't want to shirk from that. We don't want to step away out of fear and in dialogue or anything else and just kind of start saying, "You know what, I hope it all works out in the end. I'm just going to go to church on Sunday until the end." The second thing we talked about was the intercultural focus. And I've already spent some time on that this morning, so I'm not going to talk much more about that, but just a commitment to say this is definitively a foundational element of why we're here. And then the thing last week was when we had Chief Padilla here with us. Wasn't that great? Weren't you excited to hear what he had to say? And I just don't lose. He specifically said there are things that we're troubled about too. But we can't do some things because we're bound by law. And so we need to continue to pray for him and his workforce and the things that they're striving to do. But just a reminder, and then Lucas was here from World Relief, and he shared about the garden. And I know we had a handful of folks who were out there yesterday helping plant some trees and such. Well, we had, 30-ish guys downstairs having breakfast. But we're a part of a community. We're not insulated from it, but we are invested into it. And that was the commitment last Sunday. And so today, some final thoughts, and kind of connecting back to where we started, reminding ourselves that the church is not just an institution. I had written here, not an institution. It is in some ways. But if we ever get committed to that being the driving force, we're stuck. We are a family. And because we're a family, we have ties that bind. And that goes kind of back to the title of the message today. Family, spirit, ties that bind. And what that means for us today, I think, at least one of the things, is that we don't only meet together, we choose to meet together. We're committed to one another in a covenantal type relationship. I'm not contractually obligated to meet with you. I covenant with you alongside God's covenant with both of us because we're family and we choose. Now, I can't tell you exactly when it happened in the United States. Maybe it was the 50s or 60s, I'm going to guess. But it happened about that time that someone decided to leave one church because they envied something about another. And it wasn't that they looked at this other church and then they looked at theirs and they said, ours is not biblically solid in its teaching. It was that they looked at the other church and they said, this church is flashier. It could have been the preacher's flair for the dramatic. It could have been the worship leader's tremendous voice, or the team behind. It could have been the children's program or the youth program, but whatever it was, and I want to say in parentheses here, sometimes there are legitimate reasons for moving from one church to another. Don't hear me say you should just never leave any place. There's some. But in the space that I'm talking about here, this creates a problem. They have, like I said, stick with that word, a flashier representation in their church than we have in ours, so I'm headed over there. Now, if there's somebody who came here and left another church because we were flashier, man, we had no idea. We were pastoring in Texas, and when we got there, we were there for 4 years in this one church, and when we got there, they had it as a part of their program that every time there was a child born in the church, that they would do a big church-sponsored shower for the mom, and the church would always donate, or to the cause, a brand new stroller. And I remember stepping into that and kind of going, okay, well, what does that end up? And then the first year we were there, I think we had 8 babies. So 8 strollers. And those things ain't cheap. You know, a good solid one, and you're the church, so you want to do something good. And for some reason, I don't know, but it feels like it was a couple $300 or something, even back then, to get a good one. And I know you can get them for less, but they were budgeting that. So I remember just sitting down. But so we had this family. They were a lovely family. And simultaneously, as our church was growing bit by bit, and we were 300-400 people, there was this other church down the road, just 2 miles, that was about 1,000 people. And so this couple came to our church. I prayed with the husband, with the dad, to come to Christ. And then his wife came alongside, and she got saved too. And then we took them into membership, and trying to remember, and I baptized the husband and the wife. And then we did the baby shower like a couple weeks after that. And then the next week they were at the church of 1,000 people. And they never came back. And it didn't have anything to do, I did have a chance to talk with them. It didn't have anything to do with anything biblical that they were frustrated with at our church. And I want you to know, Pastor, we love everybody there. But what I didn't know had happened was in between the week of their baptism, so literally less than a month after they joined our church as members, they transitioned to a different church. And I'm going to come back around on this, and so you see where my heart is in a second. But he was invited then to go to a men's retreat from this other church on a weekend in between, and he found that he had some other friends that were there, and so they just shifted churches and went to that other church. I remember it was about that time they were pastoring too at Texas that we had he's now a general superintendent, but he was the head of our Sunday school ministries for the Church of the Nazarene, and he came and spoke. His name's David Graves. Some of you know this guy. And his whole family was in our church. His father and mother and 2 of his sisters attended our church there in Georgetown, Texas. And he was talking about church growth. And he said some just really interesting things that I felt like I was feeling, but I wasn't really sure about. But he put these statistics up on the screen. And one of them was this, that Texas, and this might not surprise anybody, but Texas was, of all the states in the U.S., was the fastest growing state for number of megachurches. But then alongside of it, it showed actually that the percentage of Christians in the state of Texas was going down. I feel like that concept is connected to the one I'm trying to get to. So here is, in these next few moments, a couple ideas that I want to share with us here that I think are going to fit together, but we'll see. I think that there's equal share in fault for this. I think part of it is folks who are looking for a church at different times, and then also churches and our reaction to that and what we've done. So I'm not as much putting blame out as I'm saying we need to think about some things here and figure out where we stand, how we got here. And the first idea that I want to touch on is consumerism in the church. This is a quote from Eugene Park, an article that he wrote called "The Folly of Looking for Community." He says, "We now treat community like a stop at Chipotle. You can curate your community, just like your burrito, down to your exact preference. In turn, our nation and churches have become more polarized and tribal than ever before. Turning community into a consumer commodity has led to what the New York Times has dubbed the golden age of bailing. If community is not, quote, found, if community is, quote, found, it is just as easily left." He continues, I have a second quote here from him. He says, "Many of us choose to be architects rather than builders of our communities, dreaming up an ideal church rather than committing to a real one. Yet the more we clutch our own blueprints rather than embrace the people of God has placed in front of us, the more grief we will bring to ourselves and to them. Consumer approaches to, quote, finding community naturally favor the easiest and smoothest route, and yet it's only through effort, sweat, and tears that anything worthy is built. Any genuine community will have to work through conflict." So there are places that we can go that will eliminate some sort of difficult thing that we're sorting through at the church that we're at. But it's kind of like the comment I've made to folks who have challenges in a marriage relationship and are considering the idea of committing to another relationship. It is just the concept that you always will find you in that next relationship as well, eventually. And so we need to be really careful as we look at these concepts. I'm not speaking to this morning because I'm concerned or I have an agenda against anybody who's here. Obviously, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Really lay into the people who are here for leaving. That doesn't compute. So that's not what I'm saying. But what I am trying to get to is that when we focus in on these four things that we've been talking about, that I mentioned a little bit ago, what is the what? This is who we are. And it's not going to measure up to what everybody is wanting to find. And so then the thing is so do we change to become somebody or something as a church that people are looking for? I think sometimes we want to talk about methodology, but a lot of times if you believe in the things that you have said, these are our foundational points, you have to stick with them. And so consequently, we've made some decisions that have to do with family ministry. We had some kids who just went off to leave, and we do that twice a month. The children will go out, but we don't do it every Sunday. And part of that is because I think it's important for families to spend some time worshiping together. And not just when I say worshiping, sometimes people will go, well, yeah, the music, but not the teaching. I mean, let them go. And what I would say to you is we do that twice a month. But what we've found over the course of the last, 50 or 60 years is that when we committed to saying, hey, they come through the door, and then as quickly as we can, we send the children over here, the youth over here, the adults over here, and we divide like that for all things, what we've had come back to us in a boomerang effect is most of those young people do not stay in the church. They do not have a sense of how to be able to speak to someone who is older than them. And just to be honest with you, us older folks we get real fidgety when we think we have to talk to a teenager. Because we haven't done it. And so we have, on purpose, and I'm open to whatever God suggests, okay? And that's a good thing for your pastor to be, right? But we're at this space twice a month rather than every Sunday, specifically so we can do things at times that push us into conversations cross-generationally and cross-culturally. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer, some of you probably didn't recognize Eugene Park, but maybe a few others know that name, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He said, those who love their dream of a Christian community more than they love the Christian community itself become destroyers of the Christian community. So these things that I'm sharing, I would say to you are not, again, just Ev's thoughts. There's some things that we're committed to that could shift and change in some capacity. And by the way, if you're thinking, well, could I help with some of the children's stuff, even though we're only doing it twice a month? The answer to that is always yes. Linda would, if she were here, she would echo that or amen that. Amen over here. Okay, and Kim. We're always needing help, even for those 2 Sundays a month. But see, that is the investment part of what Dietrich Bonhoeffer is talking about. That dream of the Christian community is great, but the building of that Christian community is something we all need to invest in some way. I'm not apologizing for saying that, but I think, and here's the problem with, and you're going to think that this verse doesn't really go well, but I'll explain it to you. Our problem, though, is like I said, we're humans, and the truth is we like flashy. Man, I do. I like to see things that are shiny and new and really grab my attention at every moment. Well, some folks are right now kind of going, if he would quit raising his voice, I could sleep easier. 1 Samuel 16:7. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things that people look at. People look at outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the what? So you kind of going, who are we talking about in this scripture from 1 Samuel? Okay. So there is a dialogue consistently going on in 1 Samuel between Samuel, Saul, eventually King David, God, Eli. There's a whole lot of things going on in that story. But what God is trying to say is that people look at the exterior. I'm more interested in the heart. Now that's for a person, but that's also for a church. I really don't think that God is more blessed by production values than the heart of what we do on a Sunday. Now we have lights and we have all this stuff and we have a wonderful band and a wonderful leader, but I just want to say to you, when we get to the space that God wants us on a Sunday, it doesn't have to do so much with all of that stuff. I'm not saying that there isn't anything that, that's bad about that, but I'm just saying to you, that is not how the whole thing at Asbury Seminary came about. Didn't have anything to do with the production values of what they did. You guys have read the same stuff I did, or have. It's the hungering and thirsting part. It's the willingness to submit part. So the questions we always have to ask ourselves as a church as it relates to that scripture in 1 Samuel is, are we focused on our production values more than the presentation of Christ's message? And Russell and I talk about that. And he's terrific, and these people are terrific, but the issue is the heart. The heart of God. And is that where we're headed? And is the message that we're presenting not look at our production or look at our presentation? And by the way, we're going to have that same production on Easter that we had last year. But even that, and then we had kind of a rehearsal time or a read-through time this morning with some of the people. The focus of that, if you were here on the story of the homecoming, is the heart of God searching, reaching, giving grace, and the opportunity for someone to receive that. God has come into our midst. He's there in Kentucky. And he's saying to us all, I not only can release you from the penalty of sin, I can release you from the power of sin in your life. That's pretty simple. Yeah? But is that simple gift of God what we're hungry for? And those are the things that we have to consider. When we're focused on flesh, we become an institution, a conglomerate, a corporate structure, not the living, breathing body of Christ. So Matthew 5:13. Again, this seems like a stretch verse to fit in, but this is the Amplified Bible. It says, you are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its taste, its strength, its quality, how can its saltiness be restored? It is not good for anything any longer but to be thrown out and trodden underfoot by men. And what we've been told, and this is where we're going to transition now into the next point this morning, but what we've been told basically by generations that are younger than I, is that verse or those verses represent where they feel like the church has gone. Because we pursued other things in the heart of God. Now, having just said that, I know that some of you who are my age are kind of going, yeah, that's why I'm really frustrated with these generations. Oh, help us. I mentioned earlier that we've said, okay, we are family, and so that means that we're going to choose each other. We're going to choose each other over and over and over again, even when we come to the dinner table of life, and somebody says or does something from our family that we don't like. We've still chosen to be their family. And so again, in this church, choosing connection to all generations. So the second thing I wanted to talk about in these last few minutes of the sermon today is connecting to Generation Z. Generation Z. Now, if I'm thinking right now, that's like 15 to 30-ish. Somebody with me who's following all that? I'm believing that's where we're at. Okay, 16 to 25. Basically like our vibe and youth. And by the way, at the close of this service, what we're going to do is we're going to ask those folks that fit that generation, all of our youth, to come forward, and we're going to pray and circle around them. So here's a quote from one of the articles that I read. It says, members of Gen Z were born in a context where religion in general and Christianity in particular are no longer major influence in American culture. The writer is Octavio Esqueda. Here's another comment. Dylan Smith, and this is I printed out like 4 or 5 different articles specifically. Some were Church Growth Magazine. I remember that as being one of them, but I can't remember the other article titles. Dylan Smith. All but 2 of my coworkers are 16 to 30-year-olds who were either atheist or agnostic. All of them had stories about how the church had hurt them or their families. And so if I wanted to have any form of evangelistic spiritual conversation with them, I had to first apologize for, in parentheses, for something I had nothing to do with. Boy, I hate that. Raise your hand if you like to apologize for something you had nothing to do with. And it was quiet. I don't like that either. But I've gotten to the place that I don't mind doing that if I think it will build my relationship. And here's the thing and I know that this is right now, this is running in a space politically where some people are going to maybe send me a note later. But here's the thing. I was invited, and this is a long time ago now, or it feels like it, but I was invited by Dr. Sims, by Andre Sims, to go to the gathering downtown Seattle in the middle of all the crazy weirdness. You remember that? And there was, wow. I kind of don't even really want to talk about all that. But off to the side from where we met, they were turning over cars and lighting them on fire and all kind of weirdness. And then in this one space, there were a group of folks, social activists had come, and he was going to share about some of the things to inspire and encourage hope. And so Dr. Sims invited me to come. I said on the way there, we were riding along, and I said, you know, I'm happy to come. And I said, I'm not sure how I'm going to fit in if this is primarily people of color speaking out about something. How do I fit? And he said to me, and I've remembered this every time I come to a space where this idea is kind of out front. He said to me, look, if my family was having a funeral, and this was right after George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, feel like I'm missing one of the folks from that time. But he said to me, if I was having if we were having a funeral for someone from my family and I invited you to come, wouldn't you just come to support me and my family in our grief? And so this is how that fits for me into this quote, is that when it's something that I personally was not responsible for, I can still support that person in their grief and in their struggle. Can you do that with me? We don't have to. This is one of Andre's favorite sayings too, is validation does not require agreement. I can support. I don't have to agree with everything, but I can support you and love you, even if I don't. Rest of that quote. I had to first apologize and convince them that not every Christian is judgmental or abusive. If the church wants to reach the next generation, justified or not, you'll need to apologize to most of the next generation first. And there's some of us at different times, and I've been there, man, where it's like, no way. I'm not apologizing for that. But when I get to the space of listening to someone and hearing their grief or hearing how they were hurt, we were talking about this in our class a few weeks ago. There's things that we want to say, from the generation that I'm from. We would not respond the way that this generation is. Yes, I agree with you to all things. But some of the stuff that they're frustrated and hurt about, we also deserve, folks. We deserve to be called out on. Not everything, but if they're angry or hurt, for me to take the time to sit down and talk and hear, and eventually, if possible, to get to pray, that's a worthwhile process. I want to share one quote. And I think that this goes both directions on this issue. And I think we have it on a slide. It's imperative to learn the difference between someone disrespecting you versus you feeling disrespected. Emotional ears hear from a place of offense. And sometimes it's not what they said, it's what you are triggered by. And unless you know your triggers, you'll see everything as an attack. There's a lot of stuff that I have learned that I'm defensive about that has to do with my own triggers. And if I can understand that, as the quote said, if I can understand that and put that emotional part aside, I might have a chance. It's not a disrespecting kind of conversation. It's just a being heard conversation. And again, that's both directions. I want to appeal to everybody that's say, my generation, boomers or beyond, and just say we struggle with some of that stuff that was up there. And we need to kind of analyze what is happening inside of us. And then I also want to say to the young people today, give us some grace too. Some of you wanted to amen at the first part, and some of you wanted to amen at the second part. But the whole thing about family is we give each other grace. We're committed. We're committed to move through this. I'm going to ask for the worship team to go ahead and come to the platform here. I'm going to skip down on my outline here to, I'm going to go to those last couple verses up there in just a moment. Let me come back to this concept of choices as we wrap this stuff up here. I can do what I want under some particular legal understandings. I can do what I want. I can do what I want in regard to my relationship to my community, my relationship to other people in the church. I can do what I want. Paul even says that. He says, all things are lawful for me, but not all things. This is the NIV. I got 3 translations of this one verse. NIV, all things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but all things edify not. That might be helpful for you. The King James Version says, I have the right to do anything, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. Now we're starting to get close. New American Standard Bible. All things are permitted, but not all things are of benefit. All things are permitted, but here's the one that struck me the most. All things are permitted, but not all things build other people up. How about if we focus on that? Generation to generation, culture to culture. I'm going to commit to things that build other people up. Even when they disagree with me, even if their whole generation seems to disagree with me, I want to build them up. I want to see Asbury College happen here. I want to see Asbury College revival happen in my home, in my place of work, in my sewing circle. Any place I meet people, I want to invite God's presence into that space, that we could all be changed. 1 Corinthians 9:19, though I am free and I belong to no one, I've made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. To the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those who are under the law. To those not having the law I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from the law. To the weak I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. I think he's kind of committed. And now this to our young people. 1 Timothy 4:12, do not let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Those are not opposite sides of a church family. Those are directed comments that go to all of us right here and right now. Let's stand together.